They say every lie has an expiration date. Mine expired at exactly 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday night in front of 300 of Europe's wealthiest people. The chandelier above me cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. The diamond necklace around my neck was worth even more. And the identity I'd been living under for the past 2 years, completely fabricated. My name isn't Arabella Sinclair. I'm not the granddaughter of a Scottish textile empire. I never attended boarding school in Switzerland, and the trust fund everyone believed funded my lavish lifestyle, it never existed. But for 847 days, I convinced everyone it did, including him. May this story remind you that authenticity is the only crown worth wearing. Let me take you back to where this really began. My actual name is Emma Reeves, and I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Leeds with my mum and younger brother. My father left when I was 7, leaving behind nothing but debt and disappointment. I wasn't born into poverty, but we were always one emergency away from it. Mum worked double shifts at the hospital, and I learned early that survival meant being clever. I read every book I could find, watched documentaries about the wealthy, studied their manners, their speech patterns, their tastes. I became obsessed with transformation. Not because I was greedy, but because I was tired. Tired of wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation. Tired of pretending I wasn't hungry during lunch breaks. Tired of watching opportunities go to people who simply had better surnames. By 23, I'd perfected an upper-class accent, learned wine etiquette from YouTube, and could discuss classical music despite never attending a single concert. I worked as a hostess at an exclusive members club in London, where I served champagne to people who wouldn't remember my face 5 minutes later. That's where I realized something crucial. Wealthy people rarely question other wealthy people. They assume belonging. They trust the costume. So I decided to wear one. His name was Alexander Whitmore, though everyone called him Lex, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune worth somewhere north of £8 billion. I first saw him at the club on a rainy Thursday evening. He arrived without the usual entourage, just himself, and a quiet confidence that filled the room before he even spoke. While other wealthy men demanded attention, Lex seemed almost uncomfortable with it. He was reading a first-edition Hemingway at the bar, alone. In a room full of people trying to impress each other, he was genuinely absorbed in a book. I brought him his whiskey, neat, single malt, and commented on his choice of literature. Most men would have ignored me or offered a condescending remark. Instead, he looked up with these intelligent grey eyes and said, "You've actually read it." It wasn't a question. It was recognition. We talked for 2 hours that night. I told him I was Arabella Sinclair, recently returned from consulting work in Singapore, taking time to figure out my next venture. The lies rolled off my tongue like rehearsed poetry because I'd practiced them 1,000 times in front of my bathroom mirror. He told me about the pressure of family expectations, about being seen as a bank account rather than a person, about wanting something real in a world of transaction. The irony wasn't lost on me. When he asked for my number, I gave him a new phone I'd purchased just for this identity. When he invited me to dinner the following week, I wore a vintage Chanel suit I'd found at a consignment shop and convinced the owner to let me rent. That dinner changed everything. We met at a private restaurant where there were no menus, just a chef who prepared whatever he felt inspired to create. Lex asked me questions nobody had ever asked before. What I thought about late at night, what scared me, what I'd do if money was no object. I answered with carefully constructed truths wrapped in fictional circumstances. The emotions were real, even if the backstory wasn't. By the third date, I'd fallen for him, the real him, beneath the wealth and the name. He was kind in ways rich men rarely are, remembering small details, asking about my day, listening when I spoke. He treated waiters with respect. He tipped generously, but never showily. He made me believe, just for a moment, that maybe I could actually be the person I was pretending to be. 3 months later, he introduced me to his family at their estate in the Cotswolds, a sprawling property with actual peacocks wandering the grounds, servants who'd been with the family for generations, and a dining room that seated 40. His mother, Catherine Whitmore, was exactly what I expected: polished, perceptive, and skeptical. She asked pointed questions about my family, my education, my connections. I'd prepared for this interrogation with Wikipedia-level research and strategic vagueness. "The Sinclairs of Edinburgh?" she inquired, her eyes narrowing slightly. "A distant branch," I replied smoothly. "My grandfather preferred to keep the family business quiet. Old money sensibilities, you understand." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, though I caught her exchanging a glance with Lex's father. By the end of that weekend, I'd been conditionally accepted into their world. Conditionally, because I knew they were still watching, still assessing whether I was worthy of their son. The pressure was suffocating and exhilarating in equal measure. The next 18 months were the most intoxicating of my life. Lex and I became inseparable. We spent weekends at his family's villa in Provence, where we'd wake up to views of lavender fields and breakfast served on centuries-old china. We attended charity galas, where I wore borrowed jewelry worth more than my childhood home. We traveled on private planes to places I'd only seen in magazines. I learned to ski in the Swiss Alps, though I told everyone I was simply getting back into it after years away. I attended opera performances and pretended to understand the nuances while frantically Googling plot summaries on my phone during intermissions. I joined conversations about market trends and property investments, regurgitating things I'd read in the Financial Times that morning. The most terrifying part? I was good at it. People believed me because I believed me. I manifested Arabella Sinclair into existence through sheer force of will and meticulous attention to detail. I studied the women in Lex's circle, their mannerisms, their vocabulary, their casual references to places and experiences. I mirrored them until the mimicry became natural. Lex bought me gifts I could never have imagined: a vintage Rolex for my birthday, a wardrobe from designers whose names I'd only whispered in awe, access to a world where expensive was never a consideration. But more than the material things, he gave me something I'd craved my entire life: belonging. His friends became my friends. His world became my world. We'd host dinner parties at his penthouse apartment overlooking the Thames, where I'd play hostess with a grace I didn't know I possessed. We'd take spontaneous trips to Barcelona or Stockholm or wherever he needed to be for business, and I'd tag along, playing the role of cultured companion. There were moments, brief, fleeting moments, where I forgot I was lying, where Arabella felt more real than Emma ever had. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror of some five-star hotel suite and think, this is my life now. This is who I am. But late at night, when Lex was asleep beside me and the champagne had worn off, reality would creep back in. I'd remember my mother working night shifts while I sipped wine that cost more per bottle than her weekly salary. I'd think about my brother, still struggling to pay his student loans, while I discussed vacation properties as if I'd grown up with them. The guilt was crushing, but not crushing enough to stop, because stopping meant losing everything. Stopping meant returning to invisibility, to being overlooked, to being ordinary. And I'd tasted extraordinary. There was no going back. Lex proposed to me on a yacht off the coast of the Greek islands, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. He didn't make a grand spectacle of it. That wasn't his style. Instead, we were alone on the deck, and he simply took my hand and said, I want to spend my life with you. Not the version of you that you think I want to see, but whoever you actually are. The irony cut deep. I said yes, of course. What else could I do? By then, I'd convinced myself that maybe he did know the real me. Maybe Emma and Arabella had merged into something genuine. Maybe love could retroactively justify the lies. The engagement ring was a flawless 5-carat diamond that probably cost more than most houses. When I wore it, I felt the weight of more than just the jewelry. I felt the weight of expectations, of the life I'd built on foundations of fiction, of the inevitable collapse I knew was coming, but refused to acknowledge. His mother started planning the wedding immediately. A spring ceremony at their estate, guest list of 500, coverage in society magazines. Every detail was another thread in the web I'd woven, another layer to the identity I'd constructed. I should have been terrified. Instead, I was thrilled. The cracks started small. It began with a woman named Philippa, an old family friend of the Whitmores who'd returned from living abroad. She was at a garden party at the estate, and when she was introduced to me as Arabella Sinclair, her eyebrows rose slightly. Sinclair? She repeated. I knew some Sinclairs in Edinburgh. Which branch are you from? I gave my practiced answer about the distant relatives who kept to themselves, but she persisted with specific questions about locations, businesses, family trees. I deflected with charm and vague references, but I saw suspicion flicker across her face. That night, Lex's mother pulled me aside in the conservatory. The evening light filtered through the glass, making everything feel exposed. Philippa mentioned she couldn't quite place your family, Catherine said, her voice pleasant, but her eyes sharp. She's quite knowledgeable about Scottish society. Surprisingly, she'd never heard of your grandfather's textile business. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. As I've mentioned, grandfather was intensely private. He avoided society circles deliberately. I'm afraid that's just how our family operated. She studied me for a long moment, before nodding slowly. Of course. How unusual, though, for such a successful business to leave so little footprint. The message was clear. She was watching. After that, I noticed changes, small ones at first. Catherine asking more probing questions about my past. Lex's father requesting details about my family's investments. Friends casually mentioning they'd tried to look up my grandfather's company and found nothing. I became paranoid, constantly checking to make sure my story remained consistent, that no detail contradicted another. I created elaborate explanations for why there was so little information about my family: reclusive grandfather, private holdings, deliberate anonymity, but the net was tightening. Then came the photograph. We were at a charity auction, and someone was taking photos for the society pages. A photographer I didn't recognize kept pointing his camera at me, taking shot after shot. Normally, I'd have been flattered by the attention, but something about his focus felt wrong, predatory, almost. Later that night, I received a message from an unknown number. "Nice dress, Emma." My blood turned to ice. Someone knew. Someone had found me. I deleted the message immediately and tried to convince myself it was a wrong number, a coincidence. But I knew better. The way he'd said Emma, like he was peeling back a mask. The paranoia intensified. I started seeing threats everywhere. Every whispered conversation felt like it was about me. Every glance seemed suspicious. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced that this would be the day everything fell apart. Lex noticed the change in me. "You seem on edge lately," he said one morning over breakfast. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just wedding stress." But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. I hired a private investigator using cash I'd been secretly saving to find out who'd sent that message. He reported back a week later, a freelance journalist who specialized in exposing social climbers and frauds. He'd been investigating me for months, apparently tipped off by someone who recognized me from my hostess days. The investigator gave me a choice: pay him a substantial sum to make the information disappear, or wait for it to go public. I paid him everything I had, including the emergency funds I'd stashed away. It bought me silence, but not security, because now I knew. The clock was ticking, and my time as Arabella Sinclair was running out. The end came at the engagement party. Lex's parents had organized a grand celebration at their London residence, inviting everyone who mattered in their social sphere. 300 guests, a live orchestra, champagne towers, and more flowers than I'd seen in my entire life. I wore a custom gown in midnight blue, the diamond engagement ring catching light with every movement. I looked every inch the heiress I claimed to be. For most of the evening, everything was perfect. I mingled with grace, accepted congratulations, played my role flawlessly. Lex held my hand and looked at me like I was his entire world. Then, at 11:47 p.m., the music stopped. Catherine Whitmore stepped onto the small stage where the band had been playing. Her expression was composed, but there was something cold in her eyes that made my stomach drop. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," she began, her voice carrying across the silent room. "We're here to celebrate what we thought was a joyous occasion, the engagement of my son Alexander to Miss Arabella Sinclair." The way she said my fake name, the emphasis, the slight pause, made it clear something terrible was about to happen. "However," she continued, "it has come to our attention that we've been operating under certain misconceptions." The room felt like it was tilting. Lex looked confused, glancing between his mother and me. I couldn't breathe. Catherine pulled out a folder, and even from across the room, I could see it was thick with papers. "Miss Arabella Sinclair does not exist. The Sinclair textile empire she claimed to descend from, a fabrication. Her trust fund, imaginary. Her boarding school education in Switzerland never happened. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt 300 pairs of eyes turn toward me. Her real name, Catherine said, her voice cutting through the shocked murmurs, is Emma Reeves. She grew up in Leeds, worked as a hostess at the Cromwell Club, and has been systematically lying to my son and our family for over 2 years. The folder dropped onto a nearby table with a heavy thud. Inside, I knew, was everything. My real birth certificate, school records, employment history, photographs from my actual childhood. Evidence of every lie I'd ever told. Lex turned to look at me, his face drained of color. Tell me this isn't true. I wanted to deny it, wanted to claim it was a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, anything. But the proof was irrefutable, and we both knew it. Lex, my voice broke. I can explain. Explain? His voice was barely a whisper, but the hurt in it was deafening. Explain what exactly? That every single thing you've told me about yourself has been a lie. Tears blurred my vision. Around us, people were already pulling out phones, no doubt texting friends, posting on social media. My humiliation was being broadcast in real time. I fell in love with you, I said desperately. That part was real. Everything I felt for you was real. How could anything be real when you're not even who you said you were? His eyes, those kind, intelligent eyes that had looked at me with such affection, now held only betrayal. I told you I wanted to know the real you. I gave you every opportunity to tell me the truth. And instead, you just kept lying. Catherine's voice cut through our conversation. Security will escort Miss Reeves from the premises. I trust I don't need to explain that you are no longer welcome in this family or any associated properties. 2 security guards appeared at my elbows. The crowd parted like I was diseased. People I'd considered friends turning their backs, literally and figuratively. As they led me toward the door, I heard the whispers. I always thought something was off about her. Gold digger. Con artist. Thank God Catherine figured it out before the wedding. I pulled away from the guards long enough to turn back one last time. Lex was still in the same spot. The engagement ring I'd slipped off my finger, sitting in his palm. He looked broken. I'm sorry, I said, though I knew it changed nothing. I'm so sorry. He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. And then I was outside, in the cold London night, stripped of my costume, my character, my entire constructed existence. The door shut behind me with brutal finality. Arabella Sinclair had died, and Emma Reeves was left standing in her wreckage. The next 72 hours were a blur of horror. My face was everywhere. Someone had leaked photos from the engagement party, capturing the exact moment of my exposure. Headlines screamed, "Fake heiress exposed," "Social climbers con collapses," "How Emma Reeves fooled Britain's elite." The comment sections were vicious. People dissected every photo of me, every interview I'd given to society magazines, looking for clues they'd missed. They called me a sociopath, a criminal, a parasite. Some suggested I should be prosecuted for fraud, though technically I hadn't stolen anything, just pretended to be someone I wasn't. I retreated to the only place I had left, my mother's apartment in Leeds, the same 2-bedroom flat I'd grown up in, now feeling impossibly small after years of penthouses and estates. Mum didn't say, "I told you so." though she had every right to. She just held me while I cried on her worn sofa, the same way she'd done when I was a child. I tried to be someone else. I sobbed into her shoulder. I tried so hard to be better than what I was. You were always enough, love, she said quietly. You just never believed it. But I'd lost more than just Lex and the lifestyle. I'd lost myself somewhere in the performance. I didn't know who Emma Reeves was anymore. She felt like a stranger, someone I'd abandoned years ago in pursuit of a shinier version. The practical fallout was immediate and severe. I had no job. I'd quit my hostess position once I'd gotten close to Lex. I had no savings. I'd spent everything maintaining my fake identity and paying off the investigator. I had no references. No one would touch me after the scandal. The gown I'd worn to the engagement party, which I'd somehow managed to take with me, sat in a heap in the corner of my childhood bedroom. A £3,000 reminder of everything I'd lost. But worse than the financial ruin was the emotional devastation. I genuinely loved Lex. Somewhere between the lies and the performance, real feelings had emerged. I'd loved the way he laughed at obscure jokes, the way he took time to understand complex problems, the way he treated everyone with basic dignity. I'd loved his quiet intelligence and his reluctance to use his wealth as a weapon. And I'd destroyed any chance of that love being real by building it on fiction. The media feeding frenzy intensified. I received death threats from strangers who saw me as a symbol of everything wrong with social climbing. I got interview requests from tabloids wanting me to tell my side. I was offered money to appear on talk shows, to write a tell-all book, to monetize my humiliation. I refused everything. What was there to say? That I'd lied? That I'd gotten caught? That I'd hurt someone I cared about in pursuit of a fantasy? 3 weeks after the engagement party, my brother found me drinking cheap wine alone at 2 a.m., scrolling through articles about myself. You need to stop, he said, taking the laptop away. You're torturing yourself. I deserve it, I replied. Do you know what I've done? Do you understand how many people I've hurt? Yeah, you screwed up, massively, but drowning in guilt won't fix anything. He sat down next to me. The question is, what are you going to do now? I didn't have an answer. The legal questions started coming. Lex's family lawyers sent letters threatening action for fraud by misrepresentation. My mother's friend, a solicitor, reviewed them and concluded they had little grounds for actual prosecution. I hadn't stolen money or forged documents, but the threat alone was terrifying. Then came the message that changed everything. It was from an unknown email address, sent to an old account I'd almost forgotten about. You're not the only one who lied. They have secrets too. If you want to know the truth about the Whitmores, meet me at the Anchor Pub, Rotherhithe, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Come alone. Every rational part of me said it was a trap. Maybe a journalist looking for more dirt, maybe someone from Lex's family trying to intimidate me further. But I was drowning in shame and guilt, and this message offered something I desperately needed. The possibility that I wasn't the only monster in this story. I went to the meeting. The Anchor was a dive bar in South London, worlds away from the champagne lounges I'd frequented. The person who'd contacted me was a woman in her mid-40s, dressed simply, with tired eyes that had seen too much. My name is Rachel, she said, once I'd sat down. I used to work for the Whitmore family, household staff for 12 years. Why contact me? I asked, suspicious. Because Catherine Whitmore destroyed you publicly for lying about who you are. And I think you deserve to know that she's done the exact same thing, just on a much larger scale. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, photographs, copies of official records. Catherine Whitmore wasn't born into wealth, Rachel explained. Her maiden name was Catherine Briggs. She grew up in Newcastle, daughter of a factory worker and a school cafeteria lady. She worked as a secretary at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals and seduced Jonathan Whitmore when he was engaged to someone else. She created an entire fictional background, claimed to be from a respectable Surrey family, lied about her education, everything. The only difference between you and her? She succeeded. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. Birth certificates showing Catherine's working-class origins. Employment records from the factory where her father worked. Photographs of a young Catherine in clothing that clearly wasn't upper class. "Does Lex know?" I whispered. "I doubt it. She's spent 35 years burying this information. She's paid off anyone who might talk, including me for a time. But after watching her crucify you for doing exactly what she did, I couldn't stay silent anymore." "Why are you showing me this?" Rachel leaned forward. "Because you can expose her. You can show the world that the woman who destroyed you for social climbing literally did the same thing. The hypocrisy is staggering." I looked at the folder, at the proof of Catherine's own fabricated identity. Part of me wanted to take it straight to the press, to make her feel the humiliation she'd inflicted on me. But another part, a quieter, more honest part, hesitated. "If I expose this," I said slowly, "I'm no better than her. I'm using someone's past to hurt them, just like she did to me." "She deserves it," Rachel insisted. "Maybe, but Lex doesn't deserve to have his entire family history exposed as a lie. He didn't do anything wrong." Rachel sighed. "So what will you do?" I thought about it for a long moment, turning over the options in my mind. Revenge would be sweet, but it would also perpetuate the cycle. It would make me exactly the kind of person I'd been pretending not to be. "I'm going to talk to Catherine," I said finally. "Privately." Rachel looked skeptical, but handed over copies of everything. "Your funeral." Getting access to Catherine Whitmore proved easier than expected. I sent a single email with the subject line, "We need to talk about Newcastle." She responded within an hour with an address, a small art gallery in Chelsea that the family owned, empty on a Tuesday evening. She was waiting when I arrived, composed as ever, though I saw the tension in her shoulders. "I assume you've come to gloat," she said, without preamble. I placed the folder on a nearby bench. "I've come to understand." Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to my face. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked uncertain. "You did exactly what I did," I continued. "You fell in love with someone whose world you didn't belong to, and you decided to rewrite yourself to fit into it. The only difference is you didn't get caught." "The difference," she said coldly, "is that I made something of myself. I didn't just play dress-up. I built a life, raised a family, contributed to society. You were a parasite." "Was I? Or was I just a younger, less successful version of you?" The silence stretched between us, heavy, with unspoken truths. "What do you want?" Catherine finally asked. "Money? An apology? For me to clear your name?" I want you to leave me alone, I said simply. Stop the legal threats. Let me rebuild my life, whatever that looks like. In exchange, I'll keep your secret. That's it? You're not going to expose me? What would be the point? To hurt Lex even more? To prove I'm vindictive? I shook my head. I loved your son. That was real, even if everything else wasn't. I won't destroy him just to get revenge on you. Catherine studied me for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. It wasn't exactly respect, but it was close. You really did love him, she said quietly. I did. I do. Which is why I'm walking away. She picked up the folder, flipping through the contents. You could ruin me with this. I know, but I won't. Consider it a gift from one social climber to another. A bitter smile crossed her face. I'm not a social climber. I'm a self-made woman. Keep telling yourself that, I said, turning to leave. Maybe if you say it enough times, it'll become true. As I reached the door, she called out, Emma. I turned back. For what it's worth, she said, and there was something genuine in her voice now. You played the part well, better than most. In another life, you might have actually belonged. In another life, I replied, I would have been enough without pretending. The resolution didn't come with dramatic confrontations or public vindication. It came quietly, in the form of an email from Lex 3 months later. I'd spent those months rebuilding. I moved into a small flat in Bristol, away from London and its memories. I got a job at a bookshop, not glamorous, but honest work that didn't require me to be anyone but myself. I reconnected with my mother and brother, with the parts of Emma Reeves I'd left behind. Lex's email was short. Emma, my mother told me about your conversation. She also told me the truth about her own background. I won't pretend I understand why either of you felt the need to create fictional identities, but I'm beginning to understand the pressure that leads people to make such choices. I've spent these months trying to figure out what was real between us. I think, in the end, the feelings were real, even if the circumstances weren't. That doesn't mean I can forget the lies, or that we can somehow start over. Too much has been broken. But I wanted you to know that I don't hate you. I'm hurt, and I'm angry at myself for not seeing the truth sooner. But I don't hate you. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, whoever you decide to be. Lex, I read it 17 times, crying through most of them. There was no reconciliation, no fairy tale ending where love conquered all. Just acknowledgement, understanding, and the bittersweet closure of knowing that what we had, however briefly, had mattered. I never responded to the email. What could I say that hadn't already been said? Instead, I focused on the only thing I could control, becoming someone I didn't have to lie about. If you'd told me 5 years ago that I'd end up working in a bookshop in Bristol, living in a modest flat, and finding peace in simplicity, I wouldn't have believed you. That life would have seemed like failure. But here's what I've learned. Pretending to be someone else is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance, endless performance, and the nagging fear that you'll be discovered. Living as yourself, flaws, limitations, ordinary background and all, is terrifying in a different way, but it's also liberating. I still think about Lex sometimes. I wonder if he ever thinks about me, about the version of me that was partly real and partly fiction. I hope he found someone who could love him without needing to create an elaborate lie to feel worthy of him. As for Catherine Whitmore, I kept my promise. Her secret remains safe. Sometimes I see her in magazine photos at charity events, and I think about how much we have in common, how different choices led to such different outcomes. The scandal eventually faded from headlines, replaced by fresher gossip and newer scandals. People forgot about the fake heiress who fooled billionaire society, or at least stopped caring. I'm rebuilding Emma Reeves from scratch, figuring out who she is when she's not trying to be someone else. It's slower and less glamorous than being Arabella Sinclair, but it's honest. And honesty, I've discovered, is its own kind of luxury. To anyone watching this who feels inadequate, who wishes they were someone else, who dreams of transforming into a better version, I understand. I've been there. But the person you are right now, without the costume and the performance, that person is enough. More than enough. You don't need to become someone else to be worthy of love, success, or happiness. You just need to become more fully yourself. That's the truth I had to lose everything to learn. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the pull to be someone you're not, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, sharing your story or what this meant to you. And if you enjoyed this journey through my biggest mistake and what it taught me, please subscribe to this channel. There's something powerful about sharing our truths, even the messy ones. Thank you for listening to mine.